In the previous video, we learned how to configure DHCP server both on the router and on the switch. So today, I want us to finish on the dedicated DHCP server. On firewall, we'll do it later because this is not a firewall session. And hopefully we jump to the 3 DHCP server configuration on the router plus inter-VLAN routing. Then DHCP server configuration on layer 3 switch and inter-VLAN routing, and finally DHCP server configuration on the dedicated DHCP server device plus inter-VLAN routing. So I'm stressing on this area because during implementation of any network, this normally appears either of the 3, this one, or this one. So you should understand how to do all of them. So before we can do the 3 here, I want us to look at DHCP server configuration on dedicated DHCP server device. Okay, so I'll just go back. So in this video, we'll need a router, just 2911 router. I will need a switch, 2960 switch, and computers. And a dedicated DHCP server device. So I'll choose this DHCP server, just server PT, and you paste it here. Okay. So I will connect the router to the server, and then I'll connect this one to this one, and the 3. So so just turn them to DHCP. I turn all of them to DHCP, and also this I turn to DHCP. Okay. So in this case, we are doing DHCP server device on DHCP dedicated device. I mean, we are doing DHCP server configuration on dedicated DHCP server device. So in the previous video, we learned how to configure DHCP server on a router, on a layer 3 switch. So here, this should be our DHCP server. DHCP server. Yeah. So it's this device that is going to provide IP addresses to these devices here. So we are not going to touch this switch. We are only going to touch these 2 devices. And let's begin with the router. The only thing we're going to do with the router is to assign IP addresses to the interfaces, this one and this one, and tell this interface that whenever you receive any request that this computer needs IP address, then forward that request to this DHCP server. We are going to tell this interface that whenever you receive any request from these computers that they need IP address, then forward that request to this DHCP server. Okay, so let's assign IP address to this one and this one. So the first we have to identify them. So I'll just try to show the so this is gig 01, this is gig 00. So just a little bit of comment. Let's say this network 192.168.1.0/24. I copy that and I paste on the other side and make this one 2.24. I mean 2.0/24. Okay. So let's assign gig 01 192.1.1. So enable config T. So interface gig 0/1, gig 0/1, this one, gig 0/1 should be this IP address, this network 192.168.1.1 IP address to be that one with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. Oh, IP address, and you hit enter. Then you see it's down, so we need to turn it up. Just say no shutdown, no shut. So it's up. And I said that we need to tell this interface that this one, whenever you receive any request, tell this interface that whenever you receive any request from this computer that they need IP addresses, then forward that request to this DHCP server. Relay that request. This computer will try to request IP addresses. You know, there are some messages they send so that they can be given IP addresses. They are not just being given IP addresses. They have to exchange some messages. So whenever these computers try to send that message that I want IP address, that message will get into this interface of the router. And this interface, with this configuration that it should relay that request to this server, you know, the server will receive the request from these three computers and provide them with IP addresses. So let's assume this server, we are going to give it IP address of 192.168.2.254. So I copy that. Let's just assume the server, we are going to give this IP address. So we are telling this interface that interface gig 0, gig this one, that one, that whenever you receive a request from these computers that they need IP address, then forward that request to the server. So how do we relay that information? Which command tells us, will tell this interface to relay that information? It's just a simple command. We just say IP helper address to be that of the server that I've just copied, and that's all. So whenever this interface will receive any request from these computers, it will forward that request to the server, and I hit enter. So exit that interface. Now let's assign IP address to this interface, which is gig 00. So interface gig 00. Interface gig 00. IP address I want it to be 2.1. So 192.168.2.1 with a subnet mask, and I hit enter. And because it's down, let's turn it up. We just say no shut, and that's all. We just do right. That's on the router. Now we move to the DHCP server. It's on the DHCP server that we're going to create the pools now. Remember previously we were doing the pools on the router and on the multi-layer switch, but now we're going to do the pools on the DHCP server here. So we are done configuring the router. What we did on the router was just the IP addresses of this interface and of this interface. And most importantly, we were telling this interface that to relay any request from these computers to the server using this command here. Okay, so we can close the router and open the DHCP server. The first thing we do on the DHCP server is to assign it IP address statically. Make sure that you assign a DHCP server IP address statically, static IP address. So let's take the one that we just gave, that we gave it earlier, this one, and subnet mask. Then we assign it default gateway. The default gateway should be IP address of this interface, gig 00. So you can see gig 00 is 2.1. If I hover, you can see gig 00 is 2.1. So that's the default gateway of our DHCP server. Good. All right. So the next thing that you do now, after you've configured it with the static IP address, and you made sure that the default gateway is the correct interface that is connecting, and if you just can ping, if you can just try to ping 2.1, and it's pinging, that's okay. So we can go ahead and configure DHCP pools for this network. So click on the server and come under services. Click on the services. Then come under DHCP here. You click on DHCP and enable it. After you've enabled it, we want to name our pool. Let's say this was our, this was IT department. Let's just assume this was IT department. So you create a pool by the name IT department. We just edit the existing one. Just say add IT dept pool, and you give the default gateway of IT department. Default gateway of IT department should be IP address of this interface. And as you can remember, we have already told this interface that whenever you receive any request, forward to this router. So IP address of this interface was 1.1. 1.1. DNS server, we don't want to configure DNS server here, but we can just configure it as the IP address of the server. No problem. So the starting IP address should be, let's say let's say 1.11. The DHCP server should start giving host IP addresses from .11, so that we can reserve from .1 to .10, maybe to give to other devices in the network that requires static IP address, like printers. Yeah. So it's very, very important. We just come to services, you click on DHCP. The first thing you do, enable DHCP, then check on your topology. This is IT department. Create that pool, IT department pool. You can even include an hyphen there. Then you give default gateway. You come to IT department and say, oh, which is the default gateway of IT department? It should be IP address of this interface, and include it there. The DNS server, as per now, we've not configured, but you can give it as your default gateway or IP address of DHCP server. No problem. Then you indicate starting IP address. Let it start from .11 because we want to reserve from .1 to .10, and you add. You just click on add, and that's all. So if I go back to this computer, and I come to IP, you can see it's already been assigned IP address from the DHCP server. If I come to this one, come to IP, I think it's still loading. If you come to static again, you refresh it, it will come. I think this one will take .12, you see, and every parameter that will be configured there. And finally, when you come to this one, to DHCP, it has picked .13. So it's very, very simple and very, very important, because in our major real-world networking projects, we are not going to load or overwhelm the routers with too much configuration. Configuration like DHCP server should be done on dedicated DHCP server device. without overwhelming the router with too much configuration. So maybe if you have the question, I will answer so that we proceed.
So for these particular parts for the services, so you have to do DSP and the phone. How did you end up by this like a star IP address, the 11? I didn't catch that. And the number of users. Yeah.
Okay, so the number of users is calculated automatically based on your subnet mask. So if you're talking about this 11,
Yeah.
start IP address. Well, when you configure this TCP server, and you don't give a starting IP address, just let's say the starting IP address should be .1, and I save. I'll come back here, and I come to static again, and come to TCP. You will see it's taking around something .2.
Yeah.
Yeah. And .1, you see it's taken by default gateway, so it cannot assign that.
Yeah.
So let me explain better. The reason why we're giving it a start IP address like that is to reserve some IP addresses. So in a network, you have to reserve some IP addresses, maybe to assign to other devices like printers. Printers, when you connect them via network, we don't want them to, changing IP addresses. Because every time they get into the network, with the DHCP, they will require IP addresses. So we need to assign them with a static IP address that is it cannot be changed easily. Maybe manually, but not with the IP, but not with the DHCP. Because with DHCP, it will only allocate the hosts that are available IP addresses. So when you're already, let's say, you configured your computer to print to use a printer which is having 192.168.10.10, and the printer is using DCP, then unfortunately the printer is off and another computer in the network has come up and has taken that IP address. So it's conflicting. The computer is having the new computer is having the same IP address that the printer had. So the printer is coming up again. It's finding that, oh, my IP address has been used by another computer. So it gets a new IP address, but back in your computer, you configured your printer to you configured it to print to a printer that is located at 10.10. So it's finding that 10.10 is now a computer, but no longer a printer. So that's why we need to reserve some IP addresses. So we are telling the CP server that start issuing IP addresses from 1.11. Don't issue IP address from 1.1 to 1.10. So it can issue IP address from 1.11, 1.12, 13, but something like 1.1, 2.3 until 10, don't touch them. We want to reserve them for static allocation. Yeah.
Okay.
Now you understand that?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other issue?
No.
Okay. So having I've done that, so we need to proceed. So we need to do this DHCP server configuration on the router plus inter-VLAN routing. Okay. So I'll draw another topology. So in that topology, I'll need a router as normal, and I will need a switch, and let's say 6 computers, Then we do connection. So in this video, in this topology, I'll assume that this is VLAN 10, and I need 3 VLANs for demo, and this is VLAN 20, and finally this is VLAN 30. This is VLAN 30. So I'll do the comments very fast. So for example, let's say this is VLAN 10, a network of 192.168.1.0/24, and then this comes to VLAN 20 2.0, and finally this comes to VLAN 30 3.0. Okay, so in this topology we are going to do a lot of things here. The first thing that we're going to do is VLANs. We need to create VLANs and assign them to ports. So before that, just turn the computers to DHCP, all of them. To DHCP, all of them. Okay. So the next thing that we do, we create VLANs on the switch and assign them to the ports. So let's do that very fast, because you can see we have 3 VLANs here, and each VLAN is in a different network, as you can see. So in other design you can have multiple switches, but in this case I just have only one switch. So just click on the switch and we create VLANs. Enable config T. So the first thing that we do, we create VLAN, let's say VLAN 10, name to be IT. I exit VLAN 20, name to be HR, and finally VLAN 30, name to be finance. VLAN 30, name to be finance. Fin. Exit. All right. So after creating VLANs, we now assign them to the interfaces. So for example, these two interfaces that are connecting to VLAN 10, these two interfaces that are connecting to IT department should be in VLAN 10. So this is F402 and F403. So I just say interface range FA02 to 3. Then we say switch port. Sorry, just a minute. So interface range, that one, then we assign them roles of access ports, because if we need to send VLAN, then port should be in access mode. So just say switch port mode access, then make these ports access VLAN 10, because you can see here VLAN 10. So you just say switch port access VLAN 10, make them access VLAN 10 and exit. So we move to a new bunch of interfaces. This interface and this interface, FA04 and FA05 to be VLAN 20. So we just go here and say interface range 4 to 5. Then we make them access switch port mode access, then to access VLAN 20. Then we exit. And finally, we go to the two interfaces, which is FA06 and 7 for VLAN 30. So the same thing, interface range 6 to 7, switch port mode access, make them access, then access VLAN 30. Exit and do right. So the next thing that we do, being that this switch here is connected to this computer through this interface FA01, and in this topology we have multiple VLANs, VLAN 10, VLAN 20, VLAN 30, and the default VLAN 1. So if I can just say do show VLAN, you will see we have these VLANs here, VLAN 1, 10, 20, 30. VLAN 1 is called default, 10 IT, 20 HR, and finally 30 finance. And you can see VLAN 1 is having the ports that have not been assigned any VLANs. So VLAN 10 is having the 2, VLAN 20 the 2, and finally VLAN 30 the 2. And you know, if you want to communicate in any IP network, you know, through different networks, by default, this network, and this network cannot intercommunicate. They cannot communicate with each other because they are different networks. So for them to communicate, then they need a router. So if this one wants to communicate with, let's say VLAN 10 wants to communicate with VLAN 20, then it will first go to the router and come back to VLAN 30. If VLAN 20 want to communicate with VLAN 10 or VLAN 30, then they will have first to go to the router, then come back to VLAN 10 or 30. So for them to pass this interface should be trunk, because an access port only allows passage of one VLAN that has been assigned to it. So by default, this interface will only allow VLAN 1, the default VLAN, to pass through. So we must make it to be trunk to allow passage of multiple VLANs, being that we have these VLANs here in the network. So let's make this one trunk. So interface FA0/1 just say switch port mode trunk. That's all. Exit, do right. So we are done with everything on the switch. Just create VLANs, assign ports VLAN IDs, and make this connecting interface to be trunk. So everything that is remaining is here. Everything that is remaining is on the router. So let's begin the configuration. The first step we do on the router is to configure inter-VLAN routing to provide a mechanism through which different VLANs will communicate. So in the previous video, or in the previous class, we learned about inter-VLAN routing. Inter-VLAN routing using a router on a stick and switch virtual interface, or using layer 3 switch. So in this router, in this net topology, we have a router, meaning we have to use router on a stick. And how do we use router on a stick? We create sub interfaces and we assign them, we associate them to VLANs. So let's say this interface is gig 00. So for VLAN 10, we're going to create a sub interface like interface gig 0/0.10 for 20.20, for 30.30. Then we associate them to a respective VLANs. So let me go. I click this. The first thing I'll do, I'll turn that interface up so it's enable config T interface gig 0/0. So no shut, and that's all. So it's up. So it's upon us to create sub interfaces for each VLAN. So let's start with VLAN 10, VLAN 20, and VLAN 30. So when you're creating sub interface, make sure that you assign IP address and you associate it to that VLAN. So let's do that. Exit. So interface gig 0/0.10 for VLAN 10. So it's up. Then before you assign IP address, associate it first to this VLAN. How do we do that? We just say encapsulation dot 1Q10, the VLAN ID, and you hit enter. Then you assign IP address. Let's say this sub interface will act as default gateway of this department here. So let's take 10.1.1. So we just say IP address to be 192.168.1.1, service mask of 255.255.255.0, and exit. So we are done with VLAN 10. And don't forget this, we are going to use this during DHCP server allocation or creation. So let's not forget this. All right. So let's go to the second sub interface for VLAN 20. So just try to retrieve gig 00.20, hit enter. Then the first thing that you do, you associate it to VLAN 20 using which command? Encapsulation.1Q20. Then you give it IP address. IP address should be 2.1. Let's give it 2.1. Something like that, 2.1, because the network is 2.0/24, and you exit. Finally, we create a sub interface for VLAN 30, just similar thing. That's inter-VLAN routing. Then you associate to VLAN 30, encapsulation .1Q30. Then you give it IP address of, let's say, 3.1. Exit. All right. So we are done with the first phase of configuring DHCP server on the router. So let's create the pool. So let's get into DHCP server configuration. We were still doing the initial process of facilitating these VLANs to communicate. Now that we've done the first phase, now let's do the DHCP server configuration. Let's create the pools. So how do we configure DHCP server? We are going to create 3 pools. One pool for IT department, another pool for HR, and finally for finance. Finance VLAN 30, HR VLAN 20, IT VLAN 10. So let's first create a pool for IT department. Before that, don't forget to enable DHCP service DHCP to enable that service. Then you create pool. We just say IP DHCP pool. pool IT pool. Just say that. And we assign it this network. Assign this network, which is the network, just say network, to be 192.168.1.0, subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. And now you assign it default gateway. So default gateway should be, the default gateway of this pool, IT pool, should be the IP address of the sub interface. You remember the sub interface that we created here for this one. So this should be default gateway of IT pool because it's the one that has been associated to VLAN 10. We associated it to VLAN 10 here. So it should be default gateway of IT pool. So just say default router to be 192.168.1.1. So in this case, you can decide to configure DNS server or just leave, but let's just configure it. 192.168.1.1. You can configure anything for DNS server. It's not important in this case. They'll reach a time when it's very, very important. So exit. So we've created a pool for IT department and assign this network which is here and default gateway which is the IP address of the sub interface that was associated to VLAN 10. This gig 010 was associated to VLAN 10 having this IP address. So if I go to VLAN 10 here now and I click to IP, you can see it has taken IP address. So let me just come to static so that you can pick default gateway and DNS. You can see it has picked. But for VLAN 20, there's nothing yet. There's nothing yet because we've not created the pool. What is guiding here is what is guiding us here is the inter-VLAN routing configuration. Is the one that is telling that that pool should go this way and that pool should be assigned to this. So let's create a pool for HR. So the same way we did for IT, the simple configuration like this. Just 4 lines. Let's do it for HR. So it's just IP DHCP pool for HR pool, just as a HR pool. Then you give it a network. The network should be 2.0, and default router should be 2.1. You can remember default router should be default. Oh, that default that's DNS server. So let's configure default router to be 2.1. Okay, so you can see here 2.1 comes in that we created a sub interface and associated it to VLAN 20. You can remember this sub interface, it was associated to VLAN 20 and its IP address should be this one, and that IP address should be the default gateway of VLAN 20. So it's here. So exit. Now let's go back here again, and you can see the DHCP server successful. I'll try to request again. You can see it has picked everything. Now if you come to VLAN 30, because we've not done anything, nothing will work. We've not done anything, nothing will actually work here. See, it won't work. Okay, so let's do for VLAN 30. Let's create a pool for VLAN 30. So it's very, very simple. Just say a DHCP pool. It was finance department thing. Then we issue the network, which was 3.0. The network was 3.0, and default router should be the sub interface, which was 3.1, and DNS you can also assign as 3.1, although it's not important in this case. Exit and do right. So we are done configuring inter-VLAN routing with DHCP with the inter-VLAN routing. So what was a little bit challenging here is the whole process. So I'll just highlight a few steps here. Let me just come here again and request. It should now come. You can see it has come. Oh yeah. So the first step that you do, as I'm doing here, we create topology. We create topology and turn all hosts, all computers or PC to DHCP option. You can remember we were clicking every PC. It comes by default under static, but now you have to turn it to DHCP. So after doing that, after creating the topology and turning all PC to DHCP option, now you create VLANs and assign them to the port, to the respective ports. Also configure trunk here. So we should also configure trunk port. That we did on the switch. The trunk port should be the port that is connecting to the router, because it is this port that will be used to transport all of these VLANs. This port here. Alright, so after configuring these, now the configuration on the switch is done. Now we come to the router. When you come to the router, let's say this was a switch. And now we come to the router. Okay. So on the router, the first thing that we do inter-VLAN routing. Inter-VLAN routing. So in inter-VLAN routing, we create sub-interfaces. We create sub-interfaces, assign them IP, associate them first, associate to VLAN numbers, and assign them IP. So that's the first thing we do. We do in VLAN routing. We create sub-interfaces, associate them to VLAN numbers, and assign them IP. After doing that, we now create pools. Number 2, we create DHCP pools. We create DHCP pools. Create DHCP pools per as per the VLANs in the networks, as per the VLANs. Then as per the VLANs and network in each VLAN. So we should create DHCP pools as per the VLANs and the network in each VLAN. So and then note just that's NB note the default gateway of each pool should be the IP IP address of the sub interfaces created for each VLAN. And that's all. And that's all. So as you can remember, we started with a simple topology and we turned all PCs to use DHCP option. We created VLANs on this switch and assigned them to ports as per the respective VLAN here. We also configured a trunk port here to allow the passage of these multiple VLANs. Then we came to our computer here, our router here. We created sub interfaces. Then we associated them to VLAN numbers, as you can see here, somewhere here. Yeah. We created sub interfaces. We associated them to VLAN numbers, and finally assigned them IP addresses. Then we went ahead to create DHCP pools as per the VLANs and the network in each VLAN. So if you go down here, we started with IT pool. IT pool was in VLAN 10. So VLAN 10, the network was this one, and the default gateway here is called default router. The default router should be the IP address of the sub interface of VLAN 10, which is this one. And that's how you achieve DHCP server plus inter-VLAN routing configuration. So maybe if you just have question to answer.
No, this the one you write is very helpful. So when I see the on switch, when I write down those steps, it's very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, so I should be writing them actually. Sorry, I should be writing them actually. Okay, so even here I'll just write them. I didn't know it. I didn't know it will become this helpful actually.
So that's what I want mostly. It's very helpful.
Okay, sure. So even on this topology here, we said that we just create. So I'll start with the design. Just create a simple topology as below, and turn all PCs to use the DHCP option. So here we were not doing anything on the switch. We didn't do anything on the switch. It was only on the router. So what we do in the router was to assign it IP addresses first. So on the router, so we assign IP addresses to all the connecting interfaces. Then note, no. Then number 2, this is number 1. Number 2, what we should do is to configure DHCP relay agent. Configure DHCP relay agent on the connecting interface to the LAN. So just a minute. We configure DHCP relay agent. Relay agent is something like that. When I tell you something to when you receive any information from me and you don't have that information I mean, and you know the person who has that information, you ask that person. So this interface should be the relaying agent from this LAN here. So when this LAN is trying to ask IP address, because they will be sending messages, hey, kindly help me with IP address. So this interface will receive those messages that these computers wants IP address. Being that this is a relaying agent, it will transfer that request to the server. So it's the server that will respond to these clients here. So configure DHCP relaying agent on the connecting interface to the LAN. So this is the connecting interface to the LAN. All right. So we go to DHCP server. DHCP server device. Okay. So on the DHCP server device, the first thing we do static IP address allocation. We do what's called static IP address allocation. Static IP address allocation. After doing that, we now create pools. We go to number 2. We go to services. Then under services, we go to DHCP. Then under DHCP, we turn it on. Turn option, DHCP option. After you turn on the DHCP option, now step 3, we create pools. Pools as per the department. Network as per the department network. So so when, as you can remember here, we created a pool and we called it IT department. So you could see default gateway of the pool should be the IP address of the connecting interface of the router, this one. So I don't know how I can write that, but it's quite much simple. And here also you can give starting IP address. So here you can give starting IP address that I want it to start from this point. Yeah. So it's just quite much easier like this. So when you come to these computers, they should be able to pick IP addresses from the DHCP server. Is there any other question that I should highlight?